In this video, you're gonna learn what the day-to-day life is like in SaaS sales. We're gonna talk about the culture, what it's like working in tech sales. We're also gonna talk about what you're actually doing as a salesperson. And I'm also gonna share my insights working in Silicon Valley at Oracle, as well as in San Francisco at a Y Combinator-backed startup. What's going on, everybody? It's Patrick Deng here. Before we get started, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications if you want to see more sales videos like this. And let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is what exactly makes SaaS sales different, right? Software sales or tech sales, and we're gonna bundle it all together, right? What makes this industry so special compared to other industries? Now, personally, myself, before I started working in tech after I graduated from university, I actually interned at a marketing agency in Hollywood, which promoted movies like Batman and stuff like that. And I also worked in fashion and streetwear, or men's fashion specifically, selling products like Incase, G-Shock, Super Footwear. So let's go ahead and talk about the differences in working in these industries. Now, starting off, let's talk about the SaaS business model real quick, right? SaaS is essentially software where people basically pay to use your software every month. So if you think about Spotify or Netflix, technically these are SaaS companies, but on the consumer level, right? Regular people like you and I have Netflix, we have Spotify and things like that. Now, for other companies like Microsoft, Oracle, Salesforce, HubSpot, these are large companies that sell B2B SaaS products, meaning they're selling specifically to businesses, not regular consumers like you and I. And when you're selling these big products, they cost big money, right? It's expensive. So some people are paying thousands, 10,000, 100,000, even millions per year on this kind of software. And so that's essentially where salespeople come in, and sellers like me and you are the people that are selling this type of software, right? Because a company is gonna want to talk to a real person if they're gonna spend $10,000 a month on a software, right? Obviously. Now, so from my experience working at Oracle, selling human capital management software, and then I later worked at this company called LOB.com, which is a Y Combinator-backed startup. And from my experience overall, both of them, I would say working in tech, people are a lot more innovative, forward-thinking, and more open-minded compared to the other industries that I were in. I'm not saying that Hollywood and fashion, I'm not saying they're bad industries. I'm just saying that there is definitely a difference in the culture. And so for tech, I feel like people are very nice and supportive, like overall. There's just, I don't know what it is. It's just how they are. People are always trying to help you, trying to give you support and share insights, especially internally as a team. And it's very encouraging, right? Because in tech, everybody wants to do a startup, and that's part of why they got into tech. And so, there's a lot of people who may have a job as an employee, but they're always thinking like, okay, I want to do this startup. I have this idea. You want to work together on this, on a side project. It's actually a very fun and mentally stimulating environment I found. Now, working in tech and SaaS sales, it is a lot more fast-paced, right? So if you're someone that likes to go slow, tech may not be for you, because in technology, things change all the time. And just like, for a salesperson, especially someone who's just graduating from university and starting their job, they might be switching jobs every 1 or 2 years because, they might do good in one place, and then, another company offers them the similar job, but then they offer a much larger salary, and they just keep jumping around and increasing their salary, every 1 or 2 years. And, if you think about technology, it just changes so fast, right? Like, 1 year you might have a company that's doing really well. A couple years later, they might be out of business, right? And that's just how fast it goes. And if you think about, let's say, like cryptocurrency, like 5 years ago, nobody was really talking about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And just a couple years later, there's literally thousands of different companies that just came out of nowhere, came out of thin air, who have a lot of funding. And now there's this whole ecosystem in cryptocurrency companies, right? So overall, like if you work in tech sales, you have to be quick to adapt to different markets, right? You can't complain that the market's changing, product changes, customers' preferences change. They change all the time. So you have to keep adapting, right? It's not like selling a commodity like rice or steel. It's like these things change. You have to be up to date with what's going on, and you have to be able to communicate and sell these things as well. And what's really interesting is that when you work in tech, like 5 years in technology feels like a long time, whereas let's say 5 years in construction might be very, very slow and boring, right? And so, that's the overall feeling and culture and environment that I personally got working in SaaS sales. So now that you kind of get the feeling and the environment of what that is like, let's go ahead and talk about the day-to-day life, of working in sales, right? So when you're starting a software, you're typically gonna start out as a sales development rep, also known as a business development rep. And there's a lot of different acronyms and different names for this type of job, but it's pretty much the same thing, right? It's SDR, BDR, pretty much the same. And when you're starting out, all you're really doing is generating meetings, right? And a lot of times you're not even selling anything quite yet. You're just like cold calling on the phone, sending cold emails, adding people on LinkedIn, sending them a message, and just asking for a meeting. And in the beginning, it's kind of really interesting because when you're an SDR, you actually get paid a lot, especially in America. You might be making 50 to 80K OTE, meaning your commission plus your base salary combined, just for generating meetings, and you have zero experience, right? Which is pretty ridiculous because other jobs that require a lot of experience don't even get paid, 80K a year, right? And you can get this right out of graduating college. So basically for SaaS, how it works is like, you have a software and there's many other competitors of a similar software, and you have to get in the door with your potential customer. So sometimes marketing does a good job and a lot of leads come in. A lot of times that doesn't happen. You can't rely on it. So as a salesperson, you have to go out and reach out to these people. And so that's why companies, especially if they're well funded or maybe they're a large company like Google or Facebook or Microsoft, they basically hire an army of salespeople that just go out and they just keep knocking on doors. Like metaphorically, they're not actually knocking on doors, but they're cold calling, sending messages on LinkedIn, sending cold emails. They're just pounding. And most of this is actually done inside, right? So it's like inside sales. So they don't actually go outside and knock on a door and meet somebody. They just do everything remotely from an office or maybe from home. And all you're really doing is generating leads. You're trying to see like, hey, you make a cold call. Hey, this is Patrick from Oracle. You mind if I take a second to tell you why I'm calling? And then you just, talk about what value you bring and see if they're interested. And if they are, they'll book another meeting and you move them to the next step of the sales process. So let's go ahead and use an example, right? So this is software called Gusto, and I actually use it myself. It's basically like an HR payroll software. This is not a sponsored video, by the way. I just use them, and it's just a nice example. So for Gusto, essentially, they're a payroll software where if you have a bunch of employees, every month you gotta pay everybody, right? Or twice a month you gotta pay them, and then it calculates your Social Security, Medicare, and all that stuff automatically. So you just press a button and boom, everyone's paid. Now for Gusto, they go specifically for small, medium businesses, right? And maybe it might be like 50 employees, 10 employees, whatever the number is, those are the people that they're going for. So if I was a sales development rep, right, entry-level salesperson working at Gusto, here's what my day might look like. One day I might be like, okay, I'm gonna make a prospecting list. I'm gonna look for all the companies in California with 10 to 50 employees with less than 5 million in revenue who are not using a payroll software yet, or they're using a legacy old payroll software and it's time for them to upgrade. And basically I'm gonna go on LinkedIn or go buy different lists and find all these people that fit this specific criteria, right? Because if they fit this criteria, they're a lot more likely to buy my product. And so once I build this list, it could be 50 people, 100 people. It depends on how many people I can actually find that fit the bill. Then I'm just gonna, reach out to them, whether it's cold email, cold call them, and I would exhaust this list and just go through it and see, hey, are these people interested? If they are, then I keep finding more people similar to that and you keep booking meetings. But if they're not interested, I come up with a different idea and I say, okay, so now I'm gonna go for all the casinos in Nevada that are small, medium businesses, right? You can kind of see where I'm going with this. You're basically coming up with a bunch of different ideas, seeing who might be a fit, and you're trying to find a way to get a meeting and get your foot in the door and have a conversation with them. And you gotta understand, most people are gonna say no, right? Maybe they already have payroll software, your information's wrong, or they don't need it, they don't care, right? But for 100 no's, maybe you get 3 yeses, right? Or 5 yeses. People say yes to a phone call, and then maybe 1 or 2 of those 5 people might actually buy your product and service, and that's just the game. So part of the reason why salespeople get paid so much, even at an entry level, is because they have to go through that process, and it's not easy. You really have to be creative and think about who will buy your product and service. From there, you gotta have the emotional stability to handle all the rejection, and then you gotta have the sales skills to actually close the deal. So it's a multifaceted career, but these are real valuable skills that you can use in your everyday life. So if I were to say, like, what are the skills required to be a sales development rep? Well, number one, you gotta be good at communicating verbally, right? Because you gotta talk to people on the phone and you gotta qualify them to see if they're a good fit to buy your product and service. Even if you cold email them, you still gotta get on the phone and qualify them and pass them to the next person in the sales process, which we'll talk about later. You also gotta have pretty good copywriting skills. And I'm not saying you gotta be a master copywriter, but you gotta be able to write a clear, concise email that demonstrates your value, because a lot of times you're communicating through email or LinkedIn, and so you wanna come off as professional, clear, concise. And the third skill that's kind of hidden is that you got to be good at researching and coming up with creative ideas on who you can reach out to, right? You can't be static. You can't just be like, oh, these people don't respond, so my product sucks. You got to think about creative ways to pitch your product and service, right? Even though you're just an entry-level salesperson, you have to think like a CEO and really think about like, okay, who is going to buy my product today? And that's how you succeed as a sales development rep. Now, the next step of the process when it comes to selling tech and SaaS is running sales meetings and closing deals, right? So for this type of role, usually it's the account executive that does the closing, right? So basically you start as an SDR, and then when you get promoted, you become an account executive. An account executive is basically just a closer. So, all those SDRs, when they're generating all these meetings, they're basically usually, right? It depends on the organization, but they're usually generating these meetings for the account executive. So the account executive, they can sit back and relax and just have all these meetings get booked on their calendar, and all they have to do is pick up the phone and start trying to close deals. Now, for smaller companies, if you're an account executive, you might have to generate your own leads and close them at the same time. When I started at Oracle, I started as an account executive. I had to do both jobs at the same time. So it just depends on the company structure and where they're at, but usually you don't have to do that, where they'll separate SDR and account executive. But for a lot of times, you might have to do both. So just, heads up. Now, when you're selling, you're still doing most of it inside, whether, you're talking to people on the phone or you're doing a Zoom call, you're doing presentations by sharing your screen on Zoom and going through a PowerPoint, right? All of it can actually be done online. Now, in some instances, it might make sense to meet the person, in person. If you are in their geographical location, no problem. You can just take an Uber and get over there. Or sometimes if you're doing enterprise deals, I did this when I was at Oracle, we would fly out to, the person that we're selling to and do a live, full-on presentation with like, a bunch of Oracle people there. So, it really depends on, your specific sale and, where you work. But essentially, regardless of it's in person or just online, the process is pretty much the same, right? You're selling the person, you're on the phone, and this is basically the steps you walk people through, right? First, the lead is generated, usually from the SDR. Account executive gets on the phone, they qualify the person to see whether or not they're a good fit, and then you dive deeper into their problems, understand their pain to really see if this is something they should buy. From there, you take them to the presentation or demonstration to show them how you solve the problem. Then you go for negotiations and any other things that need to be solved, like technical calls or things like that. So any type of follow-up meeting, or maybe it's just negotiating the contract terms. And finally, you get to the close, right? And essentially, that's all an account executive does. They just take, that lead and they turn them into a customer and they walk you through this sales process. So normally, if you're working at a company, they already have the sales process defined. You don't have to reinvent it unless you're working at a startup, right? So if you're working at like Oracle or HubSpot or Salesforce, they've already been doing this, thousands of times over. So they have like a well-oiled machine that you just have to follow the script and walk people through. But if you're working at a startup, they may not have this yet. They may not have enough people going through their sales script yet to know if it even works. So just keep in mind that if you work at a startup, sometimes you have to keep changing things around and reinvent the script to make sure that it converts better than it already does. So obviously, for being an account executive or closer, the skills you need is verbal communication. You're gonna need to talk a lot. Essentially, your job is persuasion and talking. You're gonna need to be able to do presentations, whether it's in person as well as online through Zoom and sharing your screen, where it's more focused on audio and PowerPoint. You're gonna need to be able to negotiate because you want to make sure that you're giving the customer a fair price and they're not ripping you off. And you're also gonna still need strong written skills because you're gonna communicate a lot through email because, once you do the first meeting, you're gonna have follow-ups and you're not always gonna be on the phone all the time, and you're gonna have to communicate through email, send contracts through emails and things like that. So strong written and verbal communication is absolutely important. That's pretty much the main skill that you need. And so that's pretty much what it's like to work in SaaS sales. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And if you want a free training on how to start and accelerate your career in sales, make sure to check the link in the description for a free training that I put together for you. So that said, my name is Patrick Dang, and I'll see you guys in the next one.